Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Leer Institute's Polonsky Salon. My name is Rory O'Connell. I am a Polonsky Fellow at the Leer Institute. And joining me today is Professor Sergio Tenenbaum, and we're going to be speaking about his book, Rational Powers in Action. Hello, Sergio.
Hi, Rory. Hi. How are things going?
Great, thank you. And thank you for joining us today for this conversation. Just to let people know, we're going to be talking for a while, but I think there will be an option to submit questions to Professor Tenenbaum on either the YouTube or the Facebook pages where we're broadcasting this. So if you write a question there, it should come through to me and I'll be able to see it and communicate it to Professor Tenenbaum. Just to give some background, Professor Tenenbaum is the Professor of Philosophy at the University of Toronto. The author of numerous articles on ethics, practical rationality, and the history of philosophy, especially Kant, and is also the author of 2 books, including his new book, which we'll be discussing today. And I think it's fair to say that a distinguishing mark, and I think virtue of his work, is the way in which his reading of the history of philosophy, and especially Kant perhaps, informs his interventions in contemporary debates in ethics and debates on practical rationality. So today we're going to be talking about Sergio's new book, Rational Powers in Action, Instrumental Rationality and Extended Agency. And the book offers a genuinely novel account of the kind of rationality that governs an agent's adoption of means towards their ends. And I think at the same time, the book manages to provide a fascinating critique of dominant tendencies and approaches to instrumental rationality that have already been alive in the literature and that have been what have guided people's approach to this topic for some time. So the book kind of progresses by giving its own account and in tandem giving this fascinating critique of existing views. So thank you once again, Sergio, for joining us today. And I thought I'd just kick us off by asking, what is it exactly that an account of instrumental rationality is seeking to explain? What are we trying to do when we give a philosophical account of instrumental rationality?
So first, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the Leer Institute for having this forum. And so I think sort of the way to think, so there's this theory of instrumental rationality is kind of thinking about as a subtopic in the theory of rational agency. Rational agency is what we engage in when we try to answer like questions about how to lead our lives, what to do, what would be a good life, as opposed to the contrast generally, the theory of theoretical rationality, when we try to understand what's the case, how the world is. And so in figuring out what to do or how to conduct our lives, I think there will be kind of basically first kind of trying to understand what would be a good way of leading my life? What are the good actions to engage in? What I should do? And like the question of what to do, it was kind of a traditional way of thinking about it. And that would be the theory of substantive rationality. And then like so if I realize that kind of a good life involving being a good parent and bringing justice to the world, those are kind of very, very noble pursuits, but so now I have to understand how to do it, in face, like also the fact that those things might be competing against each other and with my other pursuits. So the theory of instrumental rationality kind of brackets the question, takes aside the question of what should I do, takes for granted that I made good decisions there and I'm kind of engaged in good pursuits. And now it's trying to understand how a rational agent would go about pursuing those ends, pursuing those goals that they chose. So that's sort of like I think sort of just a way to think. So it's like thinking now is kind of a very specific example. Now knowing that I want to teach, that teaching is an important thing in my life, I now have to sort of like apply for jobs. Once I get a job, kind of come to the classroom and so on. Those parts would be the theory of instrumental rationality, how to get things done, as it were.
I see. So, the theory of instrumental rationality is not occupied with deciding what it is I should be up to, kind of period. but in kind of working out, well, given that I'm pursuing such and such, how am I going to go about doing that? What is the way I'm going to do that?
Exactly. It's sort of often we say that, one way to put it is like that we're not engaged in criticizing what you're up to. When we're talking about the theory of rationality, of instrumental rationality, we're only engaged in seeing, like, given that that's what you're up to, are you doing it in a good way or in a bad way?
Right, I see. So if that's the kind of general topic that philosophers who are interested in instrumental rationality are interested in, what would you say distinguishes your approach in this book from kind of approaches that have hitherto been taken? Because it seems like reading the book, as it were, a large theme, a kind of guiding principle of the book is the way in which there are kind of a set of assumptions which you want to reject, but which have kind of distinguished much of the work around thinking about instrumental rationality kind of in the last 50 or so years or more.
Right, yeah. So I think one of the ways to think about what are sort of when we say about that we take for granted what people are up to, and we just try to think about what are the relevant states or states of mind that tell us what people are up to, and they're going to be they'll be kind of the entry points for instrumental rationality, what people take for granted. So typically, like one example of a theory that's sort of kind of very famous theory about that sort of that the book is arguing against as the fundamental theory of instrumental rationality is a theory of sort of maximization of expected utility. And I should say, especially for people in other fields, the theory of decision theory or game theory is used in many different branches, so, in many different disciplines. And here I'm concerned with one use of the theory as a kind of a theory of instrumental, purely as a theory of instrumental rationality. And so we started this idea, so a theory of this sort of what is instrumentally rational is to maximize expected utility or to pursue what you most prefer. And so there'll be two things that sort of like will be important in understanding, for me, in understanding this kind of theory that we'll share with many other theories. One is that the starting point is the idea of preference or utility. And those are mental states, they are purely mental states that do not manifest itself outside the possibility of the body. This is a controversial philosophical thesis, but at first they seem to not manifest themselves outside of the body of the thinker. The other part that's going to be important is they're kind of moment by moment states. They're momentary states. I could have one set of preferences right now, or something might give me utility right now and change later. What we're interested in is what in the moment maximizes my utility, what in the moment satisfies my preferences. And finally, is this sort of like it's a comparative theory. Like the theory determines what is best given sort of like, and so it's essential to the theory that it can compare the different things that I care about, that's something that I care more, something that I desire more strongly, or something I prefer over the others. And I think sort of like this tends to, in many ways we can talk more about, this tends to kind of distort the nature of rational agency, because in the end, when we want a theory of instrumental rationality tells us is what is good or bad action given what you want, or given what you pursue. But the actions extend through time, and our pursuits, like think about something that might end of being a teacher, it kind of extends through time. So that's sort of like in trying to understand what makes this rational by trying to understand things moment by moment, you're going to miss central aspects of rational agency. And also another thing that comes in various theories is that what our pursuits are by their very nature, by the nature of how we pursue things in the world, they are indeterminate. So when I want to be a good teacher, or I want to write a book, I don't think about writing a book. I don't determine exactly how good the book is, how long it's going to take me to write the book. All those things, like will I be satisfied with a book okay, or I need really an outstanding book, how outstanding, and how long should it take me? All those are kind of things that are not settled by our ends. And part of the view is that it's the very nature of practical reason that it's like that, because we have to represent our ends in a general way, but our actions are particular, and we cannot kind of always specify them to its fullest detail. So that's sort of so I think one of the ways to think of the contrast is that moment by moment, that we instead of a theory of moment by moment mental states, and what makes those moment by moment mental states rational, is a theory about extended things, extended actions, and what they make them rational in through an extended period of time. Okay? And
so
go ahead.
Yeah, no. So to kind of, I'm trying to think of a way to illustrate this. So, for example, like you gave the example of being a teacher, and you could think of, well, one way to think about the instrumental rationality of the teacher is, at any given moment in time, are they choosing to do that action which, were you to compare all of their different preferences and kind of perhaps rank them in the right way, you would yield a kind of very specific choice, a kind of very determinate action as being like the one to choose right now. But what you'd be interested in is like that choice as a kind of mental state and how it relates to the totality of the agent's preferences. That would be a way to kind of characterize the view of instrumental rationality you might get from kind of orthodox decision theory or game theory. But you could also think of teaching as and now tell me if this is wildly incorrect. You could also think of teaching as an action that you're performing, as it were, through time, an end that you've been pursuing the whole time, and instrumental rationality in terms of, well, how well is that action going, given what, the end, and that has less to do with, as it were, whether at this particular moment I've chosen from a determinate set of options, but more like, well, how I have this indeterminate end in this, like I have to myself make determinate, that of being a good teacher. How well have I fared so far in doing that? Is that a fair way of kind of
yeah, no, I think that's excellent. Like you can think about sort of like so here I am the sort of like so here's sort of one way. This is a bit of a caricature, but I think it helps understand the difference. Sort of one way to think about how teaching enters my rational agents in theories like which sort of decision theory would be just one version of it, is that sort of like right now. Well, let's take when this ends, I'm gonna have to decide what to do next, and then there'll be many things that I want to do. I want to prepare for my class on Monday. I want to talk to my children. I want to watch football, and now I have to kind of compare all those things and decide what I do, like at 12:31, whenever we finish, and then at 12:32, all those preferences come again, and I have to decide again. And I think that's sort of like and the way I think that's a wrong starting point. What I need to look is the various things that I pursue, not think about moment by choice, but through time. How am I doing? So teaching, so the teaching is an end I'm pursuing all the time. But of course, sometimes I'm kind of pursuing in a kind of passive way and just preventing it. Right now, I'm pursuing the end of teaching. But I'm sort of just kind of like in a very passive way. There are very few things that could become relevant right now. But still, like if at some point here you told me, look, someone just called and said that if you don't call back within 10 seconds, they'll fire you. Then I'd have to immediately do something about my teaching. But then sort of, and then sometimes I'll be preparing my class. At those times we're going to be indeterminate when exactly the time I should prepare a class. Right. There'll be more determinate moments which I have to be pursuing my class. And then, and how I'm doing it, I have to always look at the extended interval. Sometimes I draw this comparison. It's a bit unfair about some theories of hedonist theories of happiness, but it's like someone trying, I don't know, I once was in a talk, and it seems to be an implication of the view that sort of the way to understand how happy we are or how well through a period of time is just by adding moment by moment how happy we were at that time. And to understand enjoyment through a period of time, you understand enjoyment at each point in time. And then there's thinking about listening to music. And now, like, suppose you're listening to a Beethoven symphony. And then how are you, like, just look at what happens at a 1 second interval. And it makes, and then try to add how much you're enjoying that second interval of Beethoven with all the, and then that gives you how much you enjoy the symphony. Right. That's never going to work, because it's kind of like just one note. It's kind of, there's nothing interesting about that. You're going to miss the enjoyment that was in the extended interval. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a similar problem here, that sort of like focusing on moment by moment states make you miss what instrumental rationality is, which is essential something that's extended.
Right. And I think it's helpful to point out here that your problem with this what we might call the standard view or dominant view is not that according to it, the agent has to constantly, in fact, be reflecting every kind of couple of minutes as to whether they're doing the thing they should be doing, because, you know, you can build into the theory the idea that, well, because we're limited finite beings, we have to have some principles according to which we only reconsider or just consider for the first time, perhaps, you know, our choices, you know, at certain kinds of intervals. Otherwise, we'll stop ourselves from realizing any of our ends in virtue of the fact that we're constantly worrying about whether we should. So you can kind of, the theories can try to accommodate that problem. And so the fundamental criticism is not going to be that they actually require that you do that. It's going to come out in different ways. So I thought in illustrating the difference between how your own view approaches instrumental rationality compared to the standard view, it's quite helpful to think about a famous puzzle in the literature that Warren Quinn posed and that you discuss in the book, the puzzle of the so-called puzzle of the self-torturer, because I feel like even though it's a kind of classic cooked up philosophy thought experiment, somehow the point of it is to bring out a general structure of agency, or at least it seems. You can argue that was Quinn's original purpose, and seeing how different theories deal with that, it kind of gives you a good foothold into kind of what really is the beef between them. So could you tell us a little about the predicament of the self-torture?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of, a fan of this Quinn paper. So the self-torture is offered this kind of by kind of some nasty psychologist or something like that. It's offered this kind of deal in which they're going to attach something to her arm. It could be sort of like it can feel like a shock machine that's not very intrusive. It's kind of, but it just gives you little shocks. And you have a dial that you control, but unfortunately you control only in one direction. You can only turn it up, but you can never turn it down. You can turn it up, and every time you turn up the dial, the shock that it gives you go a little bit up, starts at 0 and goes a little bit, but it's such a small increase that if you kind of ask to the difference between those two settings, two adjacent settings, so you start at setting 0 and then go to setting 1, and you ask, what's the difference between 0 and 1? Can you feel the difference? You'd say, no, they seem the same, basically. They seem the same. That's true for 1 and 2, 2 and 3, for any two adjacent settings. And then the mean psychologist propose the following deal. Each time you push the dial up one setting, every time you turn it, remember you can only turn up, you can't turn it down, you get $100,000. So it's excellent deal. As it is excellent, you think about the first time you're going to turn, you look at one, they allow you some time to see how it feels. You look at one, and then you still can move it back, and then before you can no longer move back, and you can feel the dip. It doesn't feel any different. The shock is going, but it seems a great deal, $100,000, you can't feel the diff. The same thing is going to go between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3. Every time it's going to look at a great deal, but except that those kind of almost imperceptible or imperceptible increments will add up till that it is like incredibly painful. So we really thought so painful that at the end, sort of like you at the end you'll pay all the money back, give extra money if they would take out if you went all the way to setting 1,000, you'd want to give back all the money, pay back all the money you earned, $100 million, and a bit more, so that you're not suffering that much. And the question is, what is rational for the self-torture to do? And I think there's an agreement in general that obviously irrational to go all the way up, and that there's a consensus that it's possibly irrational, or at least not, or at least it's possibly irrational not to go to the first, but certainly permissible to go to the first. And then where it's there, well, the part of the difficult for the theories are kind of to explain why. How could it be that sort of like the first move is okay, but not some subsequent move? But at some point, some subsequent move is not good, because sort of they all seem to offer you exactly the same choice. And if in sort of the classic decision theory, there's the other theories that also have difficulties. But since we're talking about decision theory, in classical decision theory, what I try to say is that decision theory is committed. There is an exact point, or at least there is a set of exact points, adjacent points, in which that's the place that it's permissible to stop. But it's hard to explain for us. So ways that you have to explain, there's something that you're getting wrong about the setup. You're not getting the difference in pain right, or you're not getting that sort of at some point the increment makes very different. And I try to, all this is very implausible. And one central argument I think that this is very implausible is to think, one thing the decision theory is committed to is decision theory says that if suppose there's one setting that's going to be irrational to go ahead, to go up. So let's say setting 22 is a setting that you have to stop, and you can't go to setting 23. And the commitment of this view is that now, if in the world you encounter this decision alone, that's going to be the only one, the only offer is going to make is to move from something like setting 22 to setting 23. How this could happen? I don't know. You have some kind of back pain that has been bothering for years, but now someone is doing an experiment, and they're going to give you like this tiny little addition to the pressure in your back, but you can't feel the difference. But because they're going to pay you $100,000, that's a lot of money. But now decision theory is committed that you have to say no, even though you wouldn't notice any difference, because that's the same setting that we chose, that we decided was the setting that you could not move between 22 and 23. So that's sort of like and in my view, what's happening here is the interaction of two indeterminate ends. You have those two indeterminate ends of like making some money, having enough money for your life, and leading a more or less pain-free life. And because they're indeterminate, there's no precise point in which you have to stop, in which you would be saying that you satisfied both ends well. And then the puzzle exploits this and puts you in a situation in which there are many places you could stop, but it's important that you stop at some point, even though at each point you could stop. Going to the next one would be perfectly rational. So it puts you in the situation that I call it sort of the kind of the non-supervenient situation. Although you could be in a situation in which if you kept going to the very end, each step would be rational, because at each step, your ends are not conflicting. And each step, it makes sense to get more money, because it's not going to make any difference to your end of paying for your life, because you're not going to notice a difference. But if you keep going, the extended agency was bad, because your extended agents didn't work and guaranteed a pain-free life. And you can't, there's no way of pinpointing what failed in extended agents for moment by moment. Every time you try to pinpoint, you're going to have this problem you're going to say that someone who had only a single choice like this would also have to stop there. So that's the problem of trying to pinpoint. And that's going to be now, the self-torture is a kind of a weird, in many ways, kind of it's artificial case. But if you think about a lot of things that go into our life, they are like that, like eating well so that you can enjoy eating, or kind of having, as opposed to but still having a healthy life. When should I stop eating ice cream? I always say another place this appears is like when you're writing a paper or doing something like that, and you could keep procrastinating. And I always say to keep in mind whenever you're on the web, on Twitter or Facebook, that one more second on Twitter and Facebook will make no difference to your other life plans. But of course, if you keep doing that, at some point you're a Twitter addict, and you're not doing anything else in your life. But the extend theories of rationality, right? To say, well, so there must be a point, or seem to be committed. There must be a point in which you spent 1 second too much on Twitter. And part of saying this is kind of like what's leading into this view that there must be that point is that you're not trying to think about the nature of rationality as extended. So there is no such point. It's just that an extended agency has to take care that you didn't spend too much time on Twitter. Yeah.
I see. Right. So if you don't, what you're saying is if you don't take the as well, it's not just the extended nature of the ends, but the, as it were, indeterminate nature as well. If you kind of ignore that, then you have to be committed to the idea in order to kind of diffuse the puzzle. You have to be committed to the idea that there's like, the agent must at some point have been making a mistake about one of the particular choice situations that she's in. She must have, in fact, this was the one that she should have just like not gone beyond, and perhaps she has imperfect information, something, but something is like preventing her from recognizing that.
That's right. Yeah. Like the exact trade-off is going to be 35 votes for $1 million or something like that.
Right.
A shot of 35 votes or $1 million. But that's sort of like that already seems kind of implausible in itself. But I think it's made more implausible when you think about, were she to avoid like the situation between 34.9 votes and 35 votes was her only decision, and then sort of like and is that worth $100,000 more? And of course, because it's gonna make no serious difference to the pain she's feeling.
Whereas on the approach you're advocating for, it's okay for somebody to say, okay, I've had enough turning up there. I've made enough money. I don't want to get stuck into too painful a state. So it's okay for me to stop here. That's perfectly rational.
That's right. Yeah.
Whereas the other view that's kind of stemming from Orthodox decision is kind of committed to saying that, well, if the next state isn't too painful, it's just irrational for you not to have gone on.
That's right. Yeah. So what the theory allows us here is kind of a counter-preferential choice, like when you think about the book explains sort of how preferences appear within the theory, but I'm just gonna use some kind of ordinary notion of when you look at any stage in the self-torture, you do prefer to move up because the difference in pain is irrelevant. It's a lot of money, so you prefer to move up. And so strictly, if you take the preferences as having to determine the rational choice has to follow preference. Part of the thing is that you're not going to have a good argument to ever stop, because you're going to say, well, I could have done better. And it's true, you could have done better. You could have had more money and very little deal. And part of what extended agency, the indeterminacy and the extended nature of your pursuits required to do is to allow, is that it requires that at some point you make counter-preferential choice, although no particular moment you're required to make a counter-preferential choice.
Right.
You are required sometimes to make a counter-preferential choice. Yeah, because otherwise you would end up in a really you end up undermining your end of living a relatively pain-free life.
Right. So exactly. So what you call the non-supervenience thesis, this brings this out very clearly, right? So what's interesting about your position is that you don't want to deny that it could be rational to go on where an agent could permissibly stop going on. And the reason why it could, at some point, the agent could kind of find themselves in error or instrumental irrationality is because the rationality of their extended pursuit isn't dependent upon them having made kind of a series of rational decisions at each step. Somehow you can make all of the rational decisions at each moment that you did, or performed actions that were in themselves considered rational, but when taken together, looked at from the point of view of your general end, it kind of spells disaster. But that doesn't mean we then go back to the particular action and say, oh, this was the one that was irrational.
Exactly.
It was this cigarette or something that you should have smoked, or it was this notch on the pain dial that you shouldn't have. It was you had to stop somewhere, and you failed to stop somewhere.
Right.
The fact that you didn't stop the fact that you went too far on this particular occasion isn't what really matters.
Right. In
terms of your rationality.
Yes, exactly. So to confess a very shameful event in my life, once I was asked to referee a book, and I said yes, and I had every intention to referee the book. Review the book. That would be worse, right. But review the book for a journal. And after 3 years, I wrote back to the editor of the journal saying, I don't think this is going to happen. If you're reviewing my book, don't take that as an as a paradigm. So this sort of and it would be sort of like what I did badly is that I didn't write the review, and I could go back. Actually, I did start. I had 2 paragraphs written. I think more, but I read the book 3 times, wrote 2 paragraphs, but then sort of like I didn't ever continue and finish, and that was too late. But would it be the mistake? I was tempted to say, wait, when exactly was I irrational? That I clearly was it because I was pursuing this end. It's not just that I was a bad person. That too, obviously, I was a bad person, but I was irrational because I was pursuing. I wrote 2 paragraphs, read the book 3 times. I was pursuing this end, but I wasn't pursuing sufficient means to it. I wasn't kind of writing enough to get the review in a reasonable time. And I could go back to the moment, when I spent a little bit more time drinking the coffee, I could have put this coffee down. And that was the moment I was irrational. That's never going to be there. And that's sort of like a part of sort of like that's what the non-supervenient thesis says. Like I could have maybe possibly, and that maybe in this case likely, every single action of mine was rational because none of them at that time compromised the kind of this undermined the possibility of writing the review.
Right.
But through time I acted irrationally.
Right.
I feel like I'm just saying in a less articulate manner what you had said.
I see. So and I find it interesting that it, as it were, it's not just the extended nature of action, as it were, the fact that it goes on through time that is important here, that's obviously central, but also what you said earlier, which is that somehow what it is that we want to do is to some extent, at least at the outset, something general and that requires some kind of specification. We need to decide exactly what will count as it were, writing the review. So you could have decided, well, I set out to write a review and I'm going to write a review. I'm going to write it in 15 minutes at the end of the day. And I will have written a review, and it may be terrible and it may be unjust to the author, but I did it. I mean, so there's a sense in which when you set out, maybe that was not what you had in mind, but it's still one version of doing the thing. Or you could have, given yourself more time to do it, and in so doing allowed yourself to write a really good review. Or you could do what you in fact did, which is wait until it was clear you couldn't do a good job, or that it would be so long after the book was released or something that would be kind of odd. And so you thought, well, okay, I'll kind of abandon this end. But somehow, like what makes that a kind of challenge in terms of the instrumental reasoning of the agent is the fact that they have to, as it were, make determinate what will constitute like writing the review, even if they have a very clear picture of the kind of review they'd want to write, they still have to determine whether it will be a review writing that happens on Monday mornings, kind of before I teach, or you can think, oh, I'll just fit it in whenever I can, and then maybe that leads to disaster. So if I've read you correctly, it's kind of both of those things in tandem, which is kind of important to the non-supervenience thesis, the movement from the general and to the more particular instantiations of it on the one hand, and then the fact that itself is something that takes place through time.
That's
not
right.
Just at a particular moment. Is that a fair?
That's right. Yeah. So you could think sort of like, of course, obviously, if the move to the general to the particular was momentary, then obviously it would supervene in a moment, like wherever you did that moment. But also, if it was perfectly determined. In the book, I try to the thing sort of every example that you give is not, because I don't think there's anything that's perfectly determined. So for instance, if I had to stop at a drug on my way home, my child asked me to buy a cookie, and I decide I kind of now have the they're going to buy a cookie for my child, and there are 7 bakeries on the way home. So there's sort of like and it says it's not fully determined, but it's pretty like there's 7 places I can stop to make. And now I can see I skipped the first one and I skipped the second. When I skip the 6th and there's only 1 left, and I think now it's now fully determined what I have to. It's not quite precise, but now it's fully determined what I have to do. So now at the moment I like the irrational, the irrationality, when I'm still pursuing the end, and the moment I cross the 7th bakery, the last one that I had to attend, that will make it irrational, because now it's fully determined what makes it. And now I can locate precisely where this determinate thing was no longer possible, is when I move beyond the 7th bake. Of course, even in this case, it's kind of exaggerated, because I could sort of like, I could be just waiting a little bit longer, or kind of step, come back, and will the bakery will still be open, or they'll still have the cookie, or the cookie is not going to be quite fresh. But sort of like, so you need both. Is the fact that it's not like my end of like writing a review. It's not like that. It's like in a sense, if I already knew exactly how I would like to vary the tale, it would have been written already. So it's sort of like it's not like that. So here sort of I can't determine the moment in which this end is no longer being pursued. Like I could perhaps determine the moment which was being possible to type 3,000 words given my typing speed, but obviously that's not my end in writing a review, kind of to write random 3,000 words given my typing speed. So you're right. You're absolutely right. The indeterminate nature and the extended nature have to be both there for the non-supervenience to obtain. On the other, I give the example sort of if my end is to give every bald person $1 million, and I can do this by pressing a button that will kind of, and it's going to be indeterminate, because indeterminate who counts as a bald person. But because it's not something then the problem is not going to arise. It's just going to press the button, and now we can see if I don't press the button at the right moment, then sort of like and then if I do press, then it's either I succeeded or I didn't, or it's indeterminate. But at that moment, it's going to be the one that determines whether I behave instrumentally rational or not.
Right, exactly. Is it we're not going to find on this view the moment where it all went wrong, or only in very special cases will it be possible to find the precise moment where it all went wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Normally, it's you have to take into account how the action as a whole is gone, or the pursuit of the end as a whole is gone, and you'll see that there are many places that it could have gone worse or better, but it wasn't necessary that any particular one of those was the one that went differently.
Right, right.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
So I mean, this difference between your way of thinking about kind of what instrumental irrationality can turn on, this is your account and previous accounts, kind of directly or leads us to a further part of your account, which I think can be framed a little bit in terms of precisely this difference. So according to your book, the topic of instrumental rationality is not going to be exhausted by an account of what we might call the principles of instrumental rationality or reasoning. We're also going to have to look at what you call instrumental virtues and correlatively instrumental vices, in order to kind of get in view the whole picture of what makes an agent instrumentally rational in a good case. And I take it part of why that has to do with the fact that it's possible, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it's possible that someone on all of these at each particular moment was adhering to the relevant principle of instrumental reasoning, that, in the sense that they were, perhaps pursuing a means to their ends. They weren't doing anything that, because they did it now, prevented them from pursuing other ends that they have. This extra minute on Twitter isn't going to stop me from writing the review, for example. But as it were, because of that, it seems, or partly because of that, we can't fully capture what's going wrong or going right when people are exhibiting kind of instrumental rationality in extended pursuits, just through the idea of adhering to those principles. And this is somehow where the instrumental virtues are coming in, or like one way to, is that a fair?
Right. Yeah. And I think particularly so I think there's a general issue of instrumental virtues that maybe not completely, but maybe could be to some extent co-opted by other views, and then sort of particularly instrumental virtues that I think come clear because of the nature of the view. So the original example about an instrumental virtue that I gave is courage, although it's kind of disputed because some philosophers think that some philosophers think that you can only be courageous in the pursuit of good ends. That's sort of like what I define as the Aristotelian view. So someone who's robbing a bank and is not afraid of being shot in the middle of the bank robbery doesn't display courage, as opposed to sort of what I think is the Kantian account of courage, which sort of the courage is the same disposition, is the same character trait, whether displayed by the hero of our story or by the bank robber, when they both were kind of fearing, like not fearing. And part of it, I say, is that sort of like courage is kind of a character trait that kind of enlarge our capacity to pursue ends. So kind of, or perhaps it's better to think the way that being a coward prevents us from pursuing certain ends. This is kind of like it's a restriction of what ends we can pursue that's internal to our will. Like there are many restrictions to the ends we can pursue. So I'd love to be able to show up in Jerusalem tomorrow and go to my favorite hummus place, but there's sort of like technicalities that makes it difficult, even pre-COVID, to move from Toronto to Jerusalem in less than 10 hours. So but cowardice makes it, but that's a problem about not having external means. But cowardice makes some pursuits impossible because internal to my will, because I'm just too scared. So I can't. Right. I can go camping in a place that has bears because I'm too. Even though I read the Wikipedia entry about sort of there being so few bear attacks, but every year. But I like just the idea. It doesn't. But that doesn't mean that. But that doesn't imply that I ever violate, for instance, the principle of instrumental rationality, because knowing this about myself, I just can be very careful about never pursuing an end. That and so part of it I try to make the book that sort of once you think of instrumental rationality as the pursuit of extended ends, and then you can see that sort of like you can engage those pursuits without ever violating any plausible principle of instrumental rationality, but yet not be a perfectly instrumental rational agent, because you can't, like your capacity to pursue ends are kind of manifestly problematic. But it's sort of there's also going to be, because of the nature of the extended, and it has this nature that the non-supervenience of the extended rationality into the moment by moment rationality. There's this virtue which I call the virtue of practical rationality, is to be able to pursue long-term ends despite that structure. That structure is sort of like a very much blamed in various in psychology, in various failures that we have in terms of procrastination, addiction, and so on. And so a virtuous agent, so there's sort of this capacity. You can think about a general capacity that they can kind of pursue an extended end in time, even though there's nothing at each moment that determines what I have to do to rationally pursue the extended end. So you can think about sort of how an angel writes a book. An angel writes a book by deciding someone who's perfectly instrumentally rational in every single aspect decides to write a book by just making decisions and then taking the means to it. Some days writing a bit. If the angel likes some days to go surfing, and does it perfectly. So it spends enough time writing the book that in the end he has just the kind of book that they wanted, and went surfing and had nice meals with friends. I can't do that. When I write a book, I have to have what I call intermediate policies. So that's kind of a limitation of my will. So I'm gonna have to do like things that sort of between I have this policy of not watching soccer ever between Monday and Friday during the day. That's gonna spoils my Champions League, but that's the only way I could write a book. Is sort of like even though but so that's kind of a limitation on my will that sort of that's brought about by sort of the difficulties that comes with the nature of extended agency. And then so there's going to be some people will be better or worse, so it's going to be a comparative virtue. So some people will have more of the virtue of practical judgment. Some people and they manifest in different ways, not just that, but sort of like not just in kind of being able to carry out without having to those intermediate policies that I'll never watch soccer between Monday and Friday, but also knowing when to. So for instance, I might have this policy, but then it's sort of I don't know. It's Barcelona against Chelsea. That's that is really special. And maybe here I should break my policy and kind of there's going to be kind of various forms in which I can be manifest as virtue in higher or lesser degrees. It can procrastinate. That'll be a form of the vice. It can be inflexible, never changing my policy no matter what. But none of those vices need to appear in failures of the principle of instrumental reasoning, because I keep revising my ends in such a way as to accommodate those failures. So instead of writing I'm going to write a meh book, and I'm not going to try to do much else during that period. So that'll be kind of not be violating any principle of instrumental rationality, but the way in which I restricted my ends are themselves a manifestation of a vice because of my difficulty in pursuing extended ends through time.
So I see, right. So this is interesting. So when you describing it just now, what I was thinking about was precisely how to frame from within a kind of theory of merely instrumental rationality, like what is going wrong with somebody who precisely performs the kind of revision of their ends, where, you know, they started out thinking, I'm going to write a great book and watch a little bit of football, or like a fair bit of football, and but then it turned into writing a mediocre book and watching quite a lot of football, and then eventually writing a bad book and watching a ton of football. Or, you know, other cases in which somehow they have to abandon lots of different ends as they go along because they failed precisely to like gauge what will be kind of necessary in order to carry out the end that they want. How do we, as it were, capture what's wrong with that, without kind of stepping outside of the confines of a kind of a mere theory of instrumental rationality? You know, I could say some pretty damning things about such a person that, you know, in a kind of scolding voice, but, you know, we would be wondering whether, as a theorist of instrumental rationality, I'm not bringing in things that are external to that. So how do we avoid that predicament? Right.
Yeah. Like I could say about this person, wow, like they could have written such a great book. What a waste of a life to someone so talented who just spent all the time watching football. But that'll be a criticism about the substantive rationalities, what the ends they chose. So that's sort of like going to be according to the view. This sort of the criticism has to be the criticism about the character. The nature of the criticism is the criticism about the character of the agent. We can't say that any of the ends that they end up pursuing were bad, because that's not. But it's just sort of it's about sort of like you can think about instrumental rationality as a general capacity to pursue whatever ends you may have. Substantive rationality is the general capacity to pursue the right ends, and instrumental rationality is the capacity to pursue whatever ends you might have. And now you can say to the agent, yeah, maybe I can't tell anything wrong you did, or tell to myself, yeah, you didn't, like, you were kind of pursuing your ends well. So if you point to me to particular ends you pursued, not even moment by moment, even as an extended agent, I can't, what I can tell is your general capacity is defective. Like, so it's a failure that's internal to the capacity itself. That sort of like, there was like, had your ends been different, you wouldn't be able to pursue it, or they were sort of like, as you're thinking about the menu of ends that were available to you, they were restricted not because of sort of limits in your physical abilities, but just internal to your own will, internal to your rational agency itself. You yourself put those incapacities into, and so he reduced your capacity to pursue ends, forcing you to restrict the life, the ways of life that were available to you. Of course, if you go back and you want to think about your total, like the rationality as in total, like as a one thing, we're now going to be able to say, of course, except unless you're lucky, this is going to be this is going to be something that will prevent you from pursue good ends unless you're lucky. And that failure is a failure because of your limited instrumental capacity, not because of your capacity to determine what the right ends are, but sort of like your instrumental capacity.
I see. So would it be right to say that the problem is, it's not like there was any point at which you decided, you know what, it would actually be better to write a disappointing book. And actually, I would, now I think of, now I've ended up in this situation, I think I would prefer to do that. There's, the only cause for the revision, as it were, and the kind of the reduction in this general pursuit of your ends, the only reason for that is due to this obstacle that you've, as it were, created for yourself precisely through failing to take sufficient means to your ends, like considered through time, as it were, over time.
Yes, that's right. Or you're failing in your ability to do this, right? Yeah,
to execute the right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and sort of like and if insofar that your pursuits were still something that's kind of accounted for from your own practical thoughts, from your own understanding of what you should do, it was a matter of luck and not a matter of your rational agency, because your rational agency had this limit.
Right, I see. And is this this could be a non sequitur, but does this way of keeping the critique of the person who revises their ends with it merely within the domain of kind of instrumental rationality, does that depend on the assumption that the agent has something like the pursuit of general happiness as an end of theirs, as it were, like that they have a conception of like the totality of their ends and what they would most like to achieve of their ends taken as a whole, or is that kind of separate concern?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think in some ways a separate concern, in a sense that I think you can think about that failure even before someone had this general conception, but so sort of that the failure will, because the failure is one of the character, like the particular ends they're pursuing, ultimately, unless they are lucky, are kind of partly accounted for by the fact that they have this limitation under instrumentally rational capacities. But of course, once you have that general end of happiness, you can say sort of like that then even that general, like as this general conception is guiding revisions and it's guiding not just like what's at the moment, but also revisions by ends turning out to be incompatible. It has now an extra. I should say this is a great question. I was thinking about that at the moment, so I might regret everything I say right now. But it's also this extraneous element composing my conception, my full conception of happiness. This is the element that when I think like I can't go camping, like when I think about how to specify the end of fun, and I take out camping, not because now it would take too long and it would sort of like and I give priority to my end of preparing my classes, but because I kind of too scared and I would not be able to get there and go out and do the things that are fun in camping. It would be just inside my, with mace in my hand all the time. That itself, the way I'm kind of adjusting my conception of happiness, it's guided for something extraneous. It's just, or it's guided by something that is the exchange, but that is restricting how I can move inside my conception of happiness in a way that's due to a failure of my own will. There's something that I could have expanded this conception of happiness just by willing. Well, it's completely within my power, but I know I won't do it.
Yeah, I see. That's interesting. I mean, that something else. This part of the account seems relevant to this part of the account that also has to do with this question of the border, if you will, between the instrumental or substantive rationality is the what's called the guise of the good thesis, the idea that one must view one's actions as being in some sense good. That also plays a role, if I recall correctly, in the theory insofar as it were, the particular good that someone attaches to an end, whether they're correct or not about whether it's good, kind of serves to give the end the kind of structure that it does, the kind of internal structure. And so, if the point of writing a review is that it's good in virtue of being a part of the academic life, it's a way of contributing to that life that you're leading, then, you know, the fact that one sees its good as consisting in that will mean that actually revising your end to one of, well, I guess I'll just write an okay review, for example, or an okay book. In some sense, it kind of shows why that revision of the end is, in some sense, disappointing. Or, you know, it's you know, even from the perspective of the instrumental reasoner, we can see that, like that, you know, without getting into the nitty gritty of whether they're right about whether an academic life is good, we can kind of see the extent, you know, that's why they failed in instrumental rationality, in virtue of the fact they've had to revise their end down from, as it were, writing a good book to writing a,
That's right. That's exactly right. So yeah, it's part of the view. So that, and that's how we kind of like see the book. I don't want to lose everything that decision theory has given us. It's given sort of a powerful theory in various aspects of life. And one of the things that we think we can get from the theory is to say, that there are preference structures, at least internal to ends. So like every time if I have an end, like building a house, then having a house, then internal to this end, there's going to be a structure. There'll be better ways of building a house than others. Like one with a roof will be better because it's part of the good that I see in a house is that it gives shelter. And so the ones with better windows will give better shelters and so on. And then sort of so when it comes to the writing the book, there's going to be a similar structure. And then sometimes, because of the way that I have a bunch of indeterminate ends, I'm not gonna write the best book I can write, because that would involve abandoning my children and so on. and it's going to be a similar structure to the one that we've been talking before. There's no precise kind of goodness of book that I can. So each end kind of affects to force me to revise like how good a book I'm planning to write. But then it's going to be, but you're absolutely right. There's going to be in the instrumental vice, there's going to be a further pressure that comes just from a failure of the will, that I have to settle for a crappy book because because I kind of because I just can't organize because I procrastinate. I don't have enough of the virtue of practical judgment.
I see. So I would like to ask even more questions now about the distinction between the two conceptions of courage that you started talking to us about. But unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time for this evening. So instead of grilling you further, I'll just thank you for joining us today and talking about your book. It's been really great.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It was great fun for me. Thank everybody. Thank you, everyone who was in the audience. And,
yes, thank you.
Thanks, Rory. That was really great.
Thanks, Sergio. This was good. All right. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.